Welcome to Redefining AI, where we explore the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and its impact on society. Today, we have a prominent guest of interest on the show, Matt Beane. Matt's unique background and expertise makes him perfectly suited to discuss the future of work in an age of intelligent machines. Matt himself is an assistant professor at UC Santa Barbara, where he conducts field research on human-robot interaction and AI in the workplace. His groundbreaking work has been published in top journals like Administrative Science Quarterly and Harvard Business Review, as well as physically gracing the TED stage. Matt's experience in itself goes far beyond academia, though. He took a 2-year break from his PhD at MIT to co-found and help fund Humatics, a full-stack IoT startup. His hands-on entrepreneurial stint combined with his pioneering research has given him an unparalleled perspective on how humans and intelligent technologies can collaborate effectively. His accomplishments, they're widely recognised. He was named a human-robot interaction pioneer and in 2023 made the prestigious Thinkers 50 radar list of the world's top management thinkers. Now, when he's not researching the future of work, Matt does enjoy creative pursuits like playing guitar and reading science fiction. But his true passion is uncovering positive examples of how humans can thrive alongside intelligent machines in the workspace. Matt, it's an honour to have you here on Redefining AI today. I'm looking forward to diving into your insights on preserving human skills and expertise as AI certainly transforms this world of work. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
So you've spent, I think it's about a decade on the ground in various types of workplaces, studying the relationship between experts and novices. What would you say, let's dive right into it, what would you say are some of the most memorable moments that you've had from these experiences, Matt?
Yeah, so it's the same really as the opening salvo in my book. That was a vignette, a true story from when I was 9 years old, utterly fascinated at watching a master tinsmith and an apprentice tinsmith in an old recreation of colonial village here in the States. And that is exactly the moment that I can take you to in my research. So in every single study I've done, I can see visions floating by, but it's always to take you into the operating room, a senior surgeon and a resident, a medical resident who's essentially an apprentice surgeon who's there for 4 to 5 years trying to learn how to do surgery. And it's the job of the senior surgeon, yes, of course, to take care of this patient. There is a patient on the bed 10 or 15 feet away from a senior surgeon who's at a control console for this robot that they're using to operate inside the patient. And the resident or apprentice is sitting at another control console that can also control that robot if the senior person gives them control of the robot. And so that senior person is very new. It's nothing like the apprenticeship you would have seen in ancient Greece for a marble sculptor on the surface. But underneath, what they're doing to the patient is, of course, critical. It's important. It's interesting. But to me, I've always been fascinated by this relationship, like how that senior person in the operating room, now with a newfangled robotic apparatus, and yes, some AI under the hood, is helping to guide that person, that resident, towards trying a bit more today, pushing for a bit more capabilities, keeping them challenged and so on, when it's working well.
And obviously this interest or desire to find out more about this relationship that you've established here for us in the sort of ecosystem of listeners and me as a host and you as a guest, what is it that fascinates you then about that particular relationship? Is it something that stems from, as you mentioned, an experience in your childhood or an interest that's maybe followed you throughout your life? What is it really that sort of fascinates you there?
Yeah, so there's part of the answer there is I have no idea. I mean, all of us, I think we have these things that we're just interested in. And if you look carefully at your life, you can see stretch all the way back to the very beginning in a certain way. And we have no explanation for that. We can try to use words to make ourselves sound in like there's some intelligent plan or clear rationale. And I just can't. I've tried. And it just ends up sounding foolish. So that said, I think it's fair to say a fair amount of my intellectual journey through school, even from, say, middle school, high school, I just found myself interested in both observing interactions between experts and novices at work. But then as I started to engage in learning about things in the world, domains of scholarship and so on, I realized this is a field of study, right? There are people, anthropologists, sociologists, economists, any variety, archaeologists, actually. There are archaeologists that go and look for archaeological evidence of apprenticeship and how it functioned. This is in my book as well. So I would say it was in early graduate school that I really sort of came to understand that across many disciplines, it's very fragmented. There's this body of intellectual and research effort to gather good data on and just show us, what is this process? How does it work? When did it start? And so I think the sort of cognitive answer to that question, the honest cognitive answer, is in graduate school, I probably read a constellation of 5 or 6 papers where I realized, this lifelong fascination sort of is a thing that is an important field of study, and I can contribute to that. Mm-hmm. So then they merged those, that sort of intellectual and visceral.
Okay. What interests me there is your use of process. So do you see it as a process between the expert and the novice?
The key word I would change there these days especially is a process. Mm-hmm. So it certainly, it occurs over time. There's no doubt about it. The building skill takes time, right? You need lots of practice. That relationship between someone trying to build skill and someone who knows more isn't instantaneous. So this is obviously, it takes time and unfolds over time. The part of the reason I wrote this book is that most of them, all of the models I could find about that relationship presumed that there was one version of that process. This gets to the word A that you used there, mm-hmm. that applies in all cases. And there are some that apply in many, many cases, and I think they're magnificent, real inspirations to me. Work done by, say, Lev and Wenger in the 90s, studying communities of practice and how people entered communities of practice and built skill and sort of moved towards the center and became an expert. That has many, many, many citations for great reason. And in our modern world especially, one size fits all doesn't work anymore. Like, there are ways of building expertise just given YouTube that are just really different from what used to happen before, involve different steps. Yes, they still go over time, but I realized I tried to write a version of this book that had a unitary process in the middle of it. And I realized that was destined for failure. The world is changing too much. There are too many ways to get at expertise. And so it was much more useful for me to provide the basic ingredients that were evident in all processes. And it's a short list. It's the skill code. That's the skill code in the book, these 3 C's that I mentioned. And that those are in any and all research around how we build skill, from kinesiology to sociology to, archaeology, you name it. But they don't sum up in the same sequence in the same way. In any paper, they might, but in general, in reality, they are not. And so it's more useful to supply the alphabet to the world, so to speak, and then people can look at their local context and figure out, okay, is this unfolding in a traditional way, more or less? And if it's less, why, where, how? It's more useful practically for people, I think, to break it down.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go a couple of steps back. So we dived into the conversation quite quickly, which is always typical. It's what we do. Defining AI. So at the start, we introduced you with part of your recognition, obviously an achievement in your own professional development, your own professional career, and building skill yourself. What is a human-robot interaction pioneer? Like, how would you define it?
That's an award that's given out every year.
How should we understand it on redefining AI?
Right. Well, so human-robot interaction, I was delighted to discover in graduate school, is a field of study. Starting in about the 80s, maybe early 90s, a field of study emerged called human-computer interaction. People like Cliff Nass were critical to this, and it's basically studying how people interact with computers as technology and what are the interesting and important features of that interaction that we can understand better so we can build better systems, help humans get more out of those interactions, become better humans as a result, that kind of thing. And it was in about the early 2000s, mid-2000s, that the robots became reasonably capable in a number of domains, and it became important to start asking questions about human-robot, as in physical robot interaction. And so people like Rod Brooks at the MIT Media Lab, who is now I'm in some regular touch with, He was building these systems technically and realized it was important to model, understand, and study as a specific and different thing how humans reacted to these systems, because robots do their behaviors over time in physical space. And if humans react in strange or unexpected ways, then the robot can't do its job. Or if they react in particular ways, the robot can do its job better. So in short, there's a journal and a conference called Human Robot Interaction, where studies about how humans deal with robots in various settings and ways and so on get published. It's a big domain of research now. And in 2012, every year they select a small crop of graduate students doing what the entire group, the field, deems to be interesting research. And I was delighted to be selected that year. At the time, I was doing a field study on how robotic telepresence systems were getting deployed in critical care settings, so a post-surgical ICU. And this is you can think of it as sort of Skype on wheels or Zoom on wheels. You drive a robot up to a patient so that you could use a camera and a screen to interact with them. And that was novel tech at the time. So I was doing an empirical study of that, and based on that study, they selected me.
Okay. What are the main findings that are coming out of studies at the moment?
Oh, in human robot interaction.
Exactly.
So given the advent of AI, that field has sort of undergone a giant convulsive explosion, yes, in a positive sense of new questions to be asked and so on. But roughly speaking, there are some that have to do with more seamless and helpful collaborative physical behavior between a human and a robot. So things like assembling a part on a moving assembly line where the robot needs to hand the part off to the human in a way that responds to human social cues. Like if I were to try to hand you an object in a physical space, we would be doing all kinds of nonverbal communication to make sure that I knew that you knew I was trying to hand you something before I let go, right? That's actually not at all trivial from a robotics point of view, to get and also to approach with the right speed and slow down at the right pace, because I'm watching what you're paying attention to. If you're paying direct attention to me, I'll come at you faster, right? Because you're ready. But if not, I might even include verbal or auditory cues like, hey, that kind of thing. Robots can do all that, but you have to program them. Now, however, I'm just picking that one example. If you have foundation models, generative AI under the hood, this whole new suite of perception and interaction modalities that those kinds of systems just on your phone offer. And so the basic move is, what happens if we bolt those into a system that before was not able to be so flexible and creative? Let's put it that way. That's just one example. So right now, the right way to think about any field like that, human-computer interaction, human-robot interaction, is that there's 10x the activity and 10x the new directions, because everybody's trying to figure out what all this generative AI means.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's fascinating the way that it's been used in the tests that are being run. It's just about not only the 10x and the effort, it's also the impact and the outcomes in, let's say, 10 years. Do you have any sort of personal envisionment in the sense of how that might develop?
Specifically in robots, or in...
Especially with the application of generative AI.
Yes.
And also the relationship between like the human and robot interaction with the use of like large language models per se, or computer vision.
Well, so I'll focus on the robotic side, the hardware side, for a brief moment, because I think it's inappropriate to assume that we'll see comparable rates and diversity of progress in physical robotic systems as we are in the digital generative AI space. The classic line in engineering and robotics is hardware is hard. And that is up close quite true for a variety of intertwined reasons. Like, to build a robot that can reliably do behavior, you have to build a supply chain that can get you low-cost goods. To assemble a robot that people will then purchase and deploy, and at enough scale such that you can then enact these behaviors. And also, by the way, you're innovating with respect to batteries, materials, actuation, sensing, and a new innovation might come along 2/3 of the way through your development process. That might mean your entire design needs to be scrapped. That is routine in robotics. And so, roughly speaking, it's just a snail's pace progress-wise compared to just being able to roll out a new model via software. Software is essentially costless to modify and redeploy. By comparison, So we will see, I'm sure, impressive and I would expect improved progress on robotics in the next 10 years because of foundation models guiding scientific discovery and informing it. But it's not going to be exponential, and it never has been. Never. And so assuming linear progress in robotics and exponential, or let's just say really rapid progress on LLMs, you're going to see more innovation and change in things to do with information processing, interpretation, communication, and so on, i.e., knowledge work, or any task a remote worker could do, or that humans might do, but that don't require a physical component. That stuff's going to get changed really rather radically compared to any work that involves a physical component. Yeah. So I think that's a reasonable assumption to make.
Can definitely see that. I would align with that assumption. If we're to look at the component of information communication, the alteration that is happening at the moment in the space of knowledge workers, the application of technology, maybe intelligent technologies, it's something that you're also quite interested in and obviously focused on. You've mentioned, and I think it was today that your book was released, was it not? The Skill Code?
That's right. That's right. As of this morning.
Well done.
Thank you.
So much success with that there. Tell us a little bit about the book then. So it came out today. It's called The Skill Code. Why did you write the book? Who's it aimed at? And what do you want the reader to primarily take away from it?
I wrote the book, and I'd say the fair answer again is I'm not sure why, really. I mean, if I'm very honest, part of me. But another is over the last 12 years, I have steadily been trying to do research, as you say, understanding how the way that we build skill at work is different now because of the advent of technologies like generative AI and robotics. And right away, sort of early in my study, I would say 2012 through 2014, it became very obvious to me, and these studies were then later published, that at least in the context I was studying it, the main commercial was, this is rather toxic to this natural skill building process I was talking about, this sort of taken for granted, it's literally 160,000 years old process of transfer of expertise across generations that isn't really built into any formal programs, rarely mentioned, because we all just assume it will happen. And yet in all these contexts, I was noticing it's because trainees, the robotic surgery is a great example, trainees are now optional in new and intensified ways because the technology allows a single expert to sort of do more of the job themselves. That meant that those novices were in the room, so to speak, but never got to play and weren't building appreciable skill. I spent the next couple, maybe 3 years after that, trying to see how generalizable that was. Like, fine, this is happening in certain contexts. I'm up to over 30 now, collecting some of my own data in contexts like warehousing and elder care and bomb disposal, but in others, getting primary data from other people. And it just became, this is a subject of the Harvard Business Review article I published in 2019, very clear that in fact, it was extraordinarily rare not to be threatening this relationship by the way we were handling these technologies. For the same reason, novice optional, basically. All my studies also, though, so that's part of the reason for the book, is to sound a wake-up call that we are inadvertently sacrificing that relationship that builds skill for the sake of short-run productivity. Two, however, is that I have found across all of these contexts and professions, a rare subset of people who are trying to learn who learn anyway and build skill anyway, in spite of these barriers. And they are the people who are finding the new way to learn that works amidst all of these barriers and threats. It's pretty different up close. And in fact, we can't implement what they suggest directly because it's inappropriate. I mean, I had surgeons, young surgeons who were trying to build skill and found ways to operate with limited supervision. That's not something we can replicate. But what we can, and I think the book does, is try to understand what are they fighting to protect, these deviant learners. I called them shadow learners in my research. And so that's another key part of the book, which is the lesson that we can take from all of these learners who are breaking and bending rules to get their skill is the skill code itself. They are fighting to protect challenge in their work, healthy challenge, healthy complexity, and healthy connection. That's the 3 C's of this skill code in the book. So I think that's a very important and valuable lesson as people examine their own context, their own personal journey, others that depend on them. We don't want to implement new deviant tactics, but what can we do to preserve those 3 Cs and keep them healthy? That's, I think, a critical part of the book. And the last part of the book is to say that I think for our collective thriving as a species, we have an obligation, an immediate pressing obligation to take the very technologies that are part of the problem, so to speak, right now, AI and robotics, and to creatively build a bit of them into a new infrastructure for skill development in the 21st century. So a small dose of the poison is in fact part of the cure, basically, just used in very different ways. And in fact, skill development and learning could be and really needs to be better than it ever has been, because we as a species need to be adapting better than we ever have been before. So that's the third leg of the stool in the book, so to speak.
A lot of really insightful and interesting information there. I've got like threefold, I'd say probably 3 or 4 questions. So when we're actually talking about skill, there can possibly be a differentiation in the definition of what is a skill. Like you can talk about a soft skill, you can talk about a hard skill. What are you actually classifying, or what is classified by the use of the word skill?
Yeah, the ability to get results reliably under pressure. Okay. If you are skilled at anything, you can get results under pressure and reliably.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, we're talking about this new matrix where you've got the interjection of intelligent technologies. AI was mentioned, and you said that it's part of the cause and also the cure. And we'll have to sort of learn how to live and adapt and develop skills with this intelligent technology. Do you see that being like a sort of differing component of the equation depending on the familiarity with the technology? Like, do you foresee it being a lot easier for future generations that will grow up with AI and that are growing up with AI and that will in 10 years obviously be extremely used to interaction? Again, it goes back to maybe this whole computer systems interaction, but do you see that being any different?
Certainly, it's possible, that future you just described. It is also very possible, and I have early data to suggest that in certain circumstances, maybe even many, subsequent generations are worse off with respect to their skill because of these systems, precisely because they've gotten used to them. I have an article on my Substack called "Don't Let AI Dumb You Down." If you use AI as it comes out of the box, ChatGPT, you will subtly be deprived of skill over time if you're not careful. And there are things you can do to protect yourself that I lay out in the article, but those are very basic. OpenAI itself needs to reconfigure their technology to nudge us towards greater skill while we are getting our results. And other companies too. But certainly just getting used to it and being a digital native might actually be a recipe for sort of sliding down your skill curve if you're not careful.
So how can we encourage them? Because obviously you said that it is almost a wake-up call that people should understand that there should be this sort of connection, this challenge to, I think, of the C's that you mentioned. How would people ensure that there is that challenge with the everyday interjection use of artificial intelligence?
Right. So there are many layered answer to that question, but I'll start with the very proximate, like you personally answer, because I think that resonates most with folks, which is there are settings in each of these technologies that you can go in and change. You can essentially tell the system how to treat you as a user. In ChatGPT, it's called custom instructions. And you can put in instructions in there that state, I want to build skill. And I want at the end of every interaction to have more skill than I did, maybe even just by a little bit than I did at the beginning. And then a section below that lets you say, how should you act differently with me in order to achieve those goals that I just set up above? And I have published in that Substack article that I described detailed instructions that I give on here's how to talk to me so that, for instance, if I ask you for something, don't just give me the answer right away. Ask me if this is something I want to learn a bit about and maybe want to struggle on my own a bit. The challenge is one of those 3 C's. So maybe do you want to just offer me one little quick opportunity to take on some challenge instead of just giving me the answer, so to speak? Most of the time, I'm going to say, no, thanks. I just want the answer. But at least then it's my choice. And I get reminded.
And do you see that? I mean, at the moment, there's a lot of talk and also quite a strong narrative around the development of digital agents. Do you see that as being a replacement? And I'm not saying, like, sort of want to discuss it a little in this whole mentor-mentee relationship. I mean, you said that people can amend the settings if they're using an AI tool like ChatGPT, Perplexity, AI, tool of choice. Would you take that as an analogy, as this mentor-mentee in a digital world.
Yeah. So the last chapter in the book goes into some exhaustive detail about what might this learning relationship look like in 2034 with currently available technologies. And yes, there would be quite proactive agents involved that had your best interests and previous history at heart, and that you could tune as you went, and that would try, for instance, to make productive matches between you and experts that you might want to collaborate with, and so on. And so there are many ways of doing that that would be truly horrifying from a privacy point of view, from a manipulation point of view. We have to guard against those. But I don't see a way for us to build the expertise that we need as a species without having artificial agents embedded in a new fabric that will help us learn better from and connect better with each other than we did before. Right now, the connections between humans at work are digital. They are thin. People are more lonely and isolated than they ever have been. I'm not saying that having a digital mentor is the solution. Far from it. That would be worse. Better would be a digital go-between that tries to enhance human connection, enhance your challenge in ways that you would absolutely be incapable of achieving on your own as two human beings.
Great. It's been fascinating, Matt. I want to thank you for taking part in shaping this narrative today on redefining AI, and I hope that you've enjoyed it as a listener. If you'd like to share the conversation, then please do share it with your friend or share it with anyone of interest. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
My pleasure.